Oh, yeah. All right, let us know, Zoe, when we got a lot of people, when we're ready to start. Oh, then I switched so I can't see her.
Everyone is in right now. Everyone
is in. Okay, great. Well, then we'll start talking. All right. So, but are you set up so people can see Nicole too? Okay, because I'm on the gallery view, but that's good. I can see everybody. Okay, I think we're good. Okay, hello everybody. So today's plan is to talk about Terra Dulce and then sort of port wines in general.
Yep, fortified wines.
Fortified wines, yeah. So here I have long pages of history class because that's the part I like. So I'm going to start with a little bit of the backstory of how this style I'm bending over anyway, how this style of wine was first invented and kind of the history of I don't know all fortified wine, but port in general, because this is a kind of our take on port wine. The actual word port, like champagne, is it's a, what is the word? We're spacing on the name of the word. This is like a dedicated word. So we can't call this wine port. It's not port because it's not made in this particular region of Portugal, but it is the style, just like our sparkling wine is not champagne, but is the style of a champagne. So sometimes in shortcutting, we'll accidentally refer to it as a port, but we shouldn't. That's not technically correct. So in order to create an actual port wine, it has to be made in the Douro Valley, which is the valley around the Douro River, which runs along the kind of northern 80% of Portugal. So it runs from the Atlantic Ocean all the way into Spain, but like right there, kind of on the top of Portugal. And that's the region, just like Champagne is the region of France where you get technically champagne, the Douro Valley is the region of Portugal where you get port. And there's a big city on the edge of the Atlantic, which is called Porto. And that's where a lot of the port was exported from. And that's why it got called port. So, you know, otherwise it would be called Douro, I guess, which is harder to say. And especially in English. And there's a long history of port and England being related. Even though it is technically always a Portuguese product, the British have a long kind of love of it and a real integrated history with it. And it goes way back. I mean, my notes start in 1386. So hold on. I hope everyone's glasses are full.
Sarah's really old.
I like the history part. So I'll be brief, and then you can ask questions.
I've been taking notes for 800 years.
I've been taking, oh my God, I was like, oh, there's 45 questions, but that's just the people. Okay. Yeah, ask questions if you want, because otherwise I'll get down the history rabbit hole. But the basic idea is that wine has been grown in Portugal. I mean, the Romans came and planted vines when the Roman Empire came and conquered all of Europe. They brought grapevines with them everywhere, including into Portugal. So there's been a long history of winemaking in Portugal since Roman times. But the creation of these more kind of fortified wines, what we think of as ports, so these sweeter and more higher alcohol wines, really trace to British and French history, because the British are crazy wine drinkers. By crazy, I mean enthusiastic, but do not have a climate up until very recently where any kind of wine grape could survive. With climate changes and some temperature changes, we are seeing some sparkling wines made somewhere in the British Isles, but generally throughout history, wine grapes couldn't survive there. So they had huge habits, I guess, of importing wines from the rest of Europe, but particularly France. And if you're all into history, you will know that the British like a lot of French things, but they also have a long history of while fighting with the French. Basically, you know, the kingdoms are intertwined, and there have been wars forever and ever. So it's been kind of a fraught history. So in 1667, Louis XIV and Charles II had a big war going, and the British decided that they were going to boycott all French wine. That was one of their strategies. and trying to deal with this situation. And Louis said, I'm closing the French ports to any British ships. And the British said, fine, we're going to boycott your wine business. And life went on. So then they needed a new source of wine. So they looked to Portugal. And Portugal had lots of great wines to offer, but one of the challenges it had is it's a lot farther away. Oh, I was going to get my globe. I guess I don't need the globe anyway, whatever, as you know. So if you're just going across the English Channel from France to England, and you have wine and you have a fairly fragile product that wants to be relatively temperature stable, it's not that big of a deal, because the voyage, even in a sailing ship, even in 1680, it wasn't that far. But if you're coming all the way from Portugal, which is already a southern climate, and having to go all the way up and through those kind of stormy seas and across the Atlantic, and then up to get to the English Channel, you have just a much longer voyage. And the wines would spoil. They would get to, by the time they got to England, they just weren't very good anymore. So a few clever folks came up with the idea of fortifying them. And they said, basically, we'll put the wines on the ships while they're still fermenting to get us a head start. And we'll put some brandy in. So they got the fermentation started. They would put brandy in, which is basically just much higher alcohol. And alcohol is a preservative, it's kind of a disinfectant. So it would protect the wines from spoiling. So that created this idea of these kind of fortified wines. And then the brandies would also stop the fermentation. They would eventually kill the yeast. So when the alcohols got high enough, you had the yeast dying. And so you ended up with these wines that.
Yeah, the alcohol gets so high, it kills the yeast, but also kills all the spoilage bacteria and other things. Basically, any microbe can't survive above about 18% alcohol. So that was the idea. It worked.
And it worked. And then part of that voyage, it would start to pick up oxygen. So in this hotter temperatures, the wines would be exposed to a lot of air and a lot of heat swings, warmer and colder temperatures, and that affected the wine. And so it kind of went from being a problem to people decided they really liked this style of wine. And so it became very popular. And I don't have to get into all the details. I have a long history, but it's going to get boring. So I will say one more history trivia, which is in 1756, Portugal created the Marquês de Pombal, who was the prime minister then, basically, or king's minister. He created this designated area called the Douro Valley, but he said only grapes grown in this particular area can be called ports. And that was the first kind of iteration of this idea of having a vineyard designated area. Even before Bordeaux was classified, or Burgundy, or these regions were kind of defined as what those wines could be, Portugal had it. So that was in the 1750s. And the other big classifications came more like the next century, even, that people started doing that. So they just started that idea of kind of having a region mean, certain wines can only come from that region. And it's by no means a grape. There are kind of 5 major grapes that usually go into ports, but there are 80 grapes that you can grow. I think it's 82 different grapes that can be grown as long as they're grown in that area, they can be considered ports, with a designation. So
Did we grow any of those 82?
We do, well, we're about to, because Tempranillo is on the list.
Oh.
So yes, there you go. So that's kind of the little bit of backstory. If you have more questions on the history, I'll go into that. But you should talk about the actual one. That is not the backstory of how Black Ankle made it. Or Terra Dulce.
So let me talk a little bit about how this wine came about for Terra Dulce for us. Port is one of many fortified wines made around the world in very different ways. And like a lot of good things at Black Ankle, this wine started with a mistake. We, in 2007, so our 3rd harvest, but our 2nd real harvest, we had some young Cabernet Sauvignon. It was a beautiful year. It was sunny. It was just a really good year for growing. And at that point, we thought that we would not be able to get our grapes fully ripe in Maryland very often. So the longer we could let them hang in the vineyard, the better they would be. We've since realized that is just wrong. But that was when we started, that's what everyone told us, and we sort of believed it. We said, okay. So we left this block to hang out for probably 3 weeks longer than we should have, I would guess.
We had a few other distractions going on,
We
which
did.
was their second
Right.
second and a half harvest. We didn't really urging. We had baby like
Right.
August 29th, the day before the harvest started. So we were working on the wines that we picked and making the wine, and we were like, oh, but the cab stuff can hang forever. We didn't even check it for probably days at a time. I mean, now we go and look at all the grapes, if not every day during harvest, certainly every other day. We kind of know what's going on, but the fact is we did flake a little bit on the cab. So
Yeah,
thinking we had a little breathing room. Yeah, we didn't. Anyway,
So we left it. So what happens when you have good weather and you leave the grapes on for a long time? They don't rot, but they start to shrivel. And sometimes they don't even start to shrivel. They just dehydrate a little bit. And so a grapevine can it creates sugar and brings that sugar to the grapes. It's somewhere around, I think 24-25% sugar is all that the grapevine can really do. It can't stuff any more than that into the grape. So it gets to about 24-25% sugar, but then if you let it sit out there for a long time, the grapes start to dehydrate. And so you can get up to much higher levels of sugar in the grapes. And we picked this block of Cabernet Sauvignon, and I believe 30 or 31%, 30 to 31% sugar, which is sort of unheard of for anything around here. The problem with that is that when you go to ferment it, the yeasts eat that sugar, turn it into alcohol and carbon dioxide, and as they build more and more alcohol, the alcohol that they create actually becomes poisonous to them, and they die.
Just like we were talking about, alcohol is an antimicrobial.
So they get to a point where they've actually created so much alcohol that it kills them. And when that point is about 27% sugar where they're going to die. So we fermented this wine, got it to it gets to about 16.5% alcohol, and then there's still 4% sugar left, and the yeast all die. So in the winter, we said, wow, this was great. Wine seemed great when we pulled it out, but maybe it's a little sweet. It should be fine. And in the winter, when we really did our serious tasting, realized we had a beautiful red wine with a whole bunch of residual sugar in it. And there's really no way to get that out short of adding water and diluting it and then adding more yeast. But that's really difficult. And for lots of reasons, it's not a good idea. So this kind of thing happens in California quite a bit because it's so hot out there. And what they would do is add water before the fermentation to bring the percent sugar down, literally a hose of water into the tank. The least expensive way to make wine is that. We don't usually have those problems in Maryland, but it's what we should have done with that block of grapes. We didn't really understand that at the time. So we were stuck with this wine, and as Sarah and Lucienne and I were sitting around saying, all right, what are we going to do with this wine? We came up with this idea. Well, what if we went the other way? What if we said, we're going to have this sweet wine? What do we do with a sweet wine? And we said, well, what if we try to make a port-like wine of some kind? And we'll get into how it's different from port, what we did, but because it's a very different process. But that's when Lucienne popped up and said, well, a few years ago, 20 years ago, I consulted for a winery in Jordan, in the Middle East, and made wine there for a few years. And here's what they did. And that is actually the model for the wine.
There,
we were up there. And so we'll talk about how we do it, but that's the model. Wasn't really port because it's made a different way, although it's can come out a similar direction.
Right. So if it were to port, it would be fermented part way, and then you add alcohol, and that kills the yeast and stops the fermentation and leaves you with a higher sugar, higher alcohol wine. In our case, we had fermented it much drier. It wasn't all the way dry, so it wasn't all the way with no sugar left, but it was much closer. And we Then we added some sugar back and some alcohol, more alcohol, because you need a high level of alcohol to protect it. Because the other strange thing that is pretty typical in fortified wines and is how we make it is that you want this wine to be treated kind of very differently than you would treat a regular wine. So much of what we do when we're trying to age wines is keep them in a dark, temperature stable, calm, quiet, kind of sheltered, protected from air environment. So, you know, if you've come down to the barrel room, you'll see it's this big straw bale building. It's our attempt to create a cave. It's there are no windows in it. It's the barrels are always kept completely full. Even when they evaporate a little bit, we go back in and make sure they're very full because we want to avoid air. For this wine, you're kind of going to the all the way opposite, because a little bit of air and a little bit of light and a little bit of well, time, I guess, can start to make the wine spoil. But if you kind of take that spoilage even further, it goes back to being good again. And the best kind of metaphor or parallel I can think of is if you think of milk and then you think of spoiled milk, it's disgusting. But if you get all the way to cheese, it's really good again, you know. So you have to kind of go all the way over the hurdle, and that's kind of what we have done with this. So
yeah, great.
Yeah,
so
the idea on that.
So we took that original lot of wine and said, all right, so what Lucien told us, said, yeah, and in Jordan, they make this wine and then they either stop it with some residual sugar in it or they add some sugar to it. And then they add enough distilled spirits to it to get it to be protected, somewhere between 18 and 20% alcohol, so it won't spoil. And then they literally put it outside in a half full tank in the desert where it's 115 during the day and 32 at night and back and forth again. And all that contracts, the wine gets, as it gets hot, it expands, and then it gets cold, it contracts, and it pulls air in and out of that tank. And he said they'll leave it out there for years. And what happens in that process is all the things Sarah talked about that we don't do with our regular wine. When you give it temperature change and give it air, it blows off all the aromas and flavors in the wine. Well, that's the idea of this one, is that you blow off all of the aromas and flavors, but you develop these secondary flavors, this sort of nuttiness that you can get out of this wine, or the sort of plum sort of characters or things that you can get out of these kind of wines. So, and that's the idea. Great, oxidize all the things you would think of regularly as wine, and then over time you're going to get these secondary things, which are really kind of cool.
Yeah. So that's when we get into what this smells like. So you have a whole different. It's not your typical wine, I guess, I don't know, flavors or aromas, or you get into kind of much more nutty and earthy and fruity, but in different kind of family of fruits, more kind of like cooked fruit flavors, I feel like you get, or anyway, so you end up with this whole different.
Yeah, I think there are some, sherry is a sort of different process also, but there are kind of some sherry like aromas in this as well, because sherry is something that's kept in half full casks for sometimes 30 years or 60 years even, to try to develop some of these things. So we don't have the whole floor yeast and now we get into sherry, but they're kind of similar. So port, as Sarah talking about, is there are several different kinds of port. One of the basic ones is you stop the fermentation in the middle with the spirits. They usually use brandy, and the brandy has certain flavors. So a big part of that, the house style, is which kind of brandy and what are the brandy flavors that you're using to stop it with. But you're getting a mix of sort of not only like wine flavors from the grapes, but you're also getting some of the juice flavors, because the wine's only half fermented and the juice flavors are very different and age differently and things. So there's a whole art in stopping it at the right time and doing, we don't really know how to do that. But
that's when we talk about ruby ports generally. That's what it is. There are lots of kinds and sub kinds. So there's white port and there's rosé port now, which is kind of a new thing. But more traditional, there's ruby port and tawny port. I feel like those are the kind of like big families of ports, and then those have subtypes. But what Ed is describing is what's usually considered a ruby port, and they're generally just not aged as long. They might be aged for a few years, but they're not usually aged for a super long time. A ruby port that has been in barrel for 5 years can be called a reserve ruby port. It's like a step along the way. And then the more aged ports are called tawny ports. And those are basically, they start, it's the same, it's kind of the same foundation, but they'll just be aged for much, much longer. And I think you have to be aged at least 10 years to become a tawny port. I think that's the first, like to be officially called a tawny port, you have to be aged at least 10 years. And then they generally, you see 10, 20, 30, 40 year designations. I mean, those wines will stay a long, long time in barrel generally for that. So I was just doing the math. So I think we started our first one, this first Terra Dulce we started in 2008. So, and the way we make it, we have a huge lot of it, and we take a little bit out and bottle it, and then we'll add a little bit back to it. So it's, we've never bottled all of it. There's always some very old grapes in it and some younger grapes in it. So people ask what grapes are in it. There are some of every grape we've ever grown, basically. I mean, every variety, and from every vintage still in that tank. So
we had a little bit of everything. Might be a tiny little bit for some of them.
Yeah, a little bit of everything. Yeah, so that's sort of fun. So I feel like we've just graduated from reserve ruby to all the way into tawny character, because we've gotten 12 years. Yeah, because it's 2020. I mean, yes, you know. So yeah, so and we'll always do that. We do have a sort of a second stream of our Terra Dulce coming, where we have some where we picked, we have one lot that we did make more the traditional way, where we fermented it part way and then kept it sweet and added alcohol much higher, at a much higher sugar level, and that is aging separately. And then we will blend them a little bit. So when we go to bottle every year or every couple of years, when it's time to bottle one, we don't necessarily just pull whatever's in the tank. We'll taste it. We might adjust the alcohol or the sugar, and then we'll use this kind of, I don't know, second stream of it to adjust. And it tends to be, it's a little bit younger. It's been in barrels now, I want to say for 5 years, I think, about. So it is starting to get some of those richer, nuttier kind of flavors coming into them. So it's a little different. Yeah.
Let's talk about the adjustments for a minute, because that's a big part of this also as well. So in port, somebody commented, Marty commented that the port producers can use Italian brandies, grappas, or they all have their own recipes or methods or whatever. Our thought for this is we did not want to introduce any non-black ankle flavors to this, but we don't have a distillery license. We don't know how to distill. We could probably take some product that we have and make something distilled out of it, but we don't know how to do that, and we don't have the space or the equipment or anything. So we have to buy something. So we ended up, we've decided we buy what's called neutral grape spirits. It's kind of like grain alcohol, if you remember from way back when, some of you when you were young, but it's made out of grapes. So we buy it in big drums. It's 190 proof, I believe, 95% alcohol. It has
basically pure alcohol.
It has to be shipped to us as a hazardous substance by truck. You can't. It needs a special permit. It's kind of crazy to do it. And that's actually, for some of you know, when the whole COVID thing started, that was what was in. That kind of alcohol was in super short supply. So we ended up giving away, I don't know, 80 gallons or something of it to Maryland to use to make hand sanitizer for when they had huge
when there was a big
shortage of that.
Yeah.
So we just had to buy some more to replace that. But so that's what we use, because we don't, that is neutral, has no flavor at all. And so we can put that in, we can keep the one as this. And the first one, I think it had 4% residual sugar, and this, we typically end up somewhere around 8 is what we shoot for in this wine. It depends on each wine. We try to get the balance we want. So we experimented at one point with saving some of our juice and putting this alcohol straight into the juice. So we would have something that was 20% sugar that we could add, so we wouldn't have to use outside sugar in the wine. And
That's what I was talking about.
That's what
Yeah,
Sarah's
that's
talking
what
about.
it's about.
That's experiment number 2. And that it's interesting. It's very, we didn't realize it at the time, but when you age juice,
Yeah.
you get different flavors. And the big difference is what you get is very raisiny flavors out of the juice. The wine, you don't get that. You get these nutty kind of flavors. So we now judiciously put a little bit of that in, but we don't want this to become a big raisin bomb, I guess. So we use a little bit of that. We use a little bit of sugar. We have a third experiment. If you remember, we had some rosé that we decided we did not
That's true.
think was good enough to be rosé. Rosé is difficult to make, and we are, Sarah and I, we've probably talked to you about this on these Zooms before, but we're rosé people. We love rosé, and we don't like bad rosé. So we made a tank, and we were like, yeah, it's not quite good enough. So we ended up putting it in barrels, putting some alcohol in it, and putting a little sugar in it, and leaving it for years. So we have a kind of rosé Terra Dulce. So now we have some blending components. This is kind of fun. In the beginning, we didn't have any blending components. We just have to take whatever's out of the tank.
Right. We'll get out a little wine sometimes, but yeah, mostly that. Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
So we have that to play with.
Yeah, that's true. So we do have a little more. So a few other, into some of the questions. So Terra Dulce versus Terra Sol. So Terra Sol is a whole different ballgame. The Terra Sol is a late harvest. So it is not fortified. We haven't added any alcohol to it. It is just, we left the fruit on the vines for a long time, ideally getting them way up to sort of 30 to 35% sugar, but on the vine still.
This time on purpose.
On purpose. Yeah, this one was on
Unlike the
purpose,
last
right? Yeah, this is on purpose. And it's more, I don't know, Sauterne style, or I mean, that's kind of our what's the right word? Like what we're going after, I guess, what we're trying to recreate. And so the idea there is that we will get actually a little bit of a special fungus on them that drinks some of the water, and that helps to concentrate the juice. So you end up with a tiny little bit of very, very sweet juice. And by the time we press it, it's almost like syrup. I mean, it's very thick. It's hard to press. You only get a little tiny yield. And then we ferment it, but we just let the fermentation go kind of as far as it can, which is not very far, because along with the amount of alcohol that yeast can take, if they're in a very high sugar environment, it is also kind of difficult for them. So the high sugar and high alcohol environment will kill the yeast, and high acid will kill the yeast much more quickly than if they were in a high alcohol environment with very little sugar left, sort of. So
I like the comment that said they actually get inebriated and fall to the bottom of the tank. And maybe they just like the Sauterne style better, so they drink more of it.
Right, or whatever it is. But yeah, they do. So that is made. Yeah, that's how that's made. So it just kind of gets to its own point, and then we will add sulfur just to make sure it stays healthy. But otherwise, it doesn't have the high alcohol. So the Terra Sol is very low alcohol usually. I think when we bottled it was 11%, 12%. I don't remember offhand, but on the low end.
Ideally, we get it low.
Yeah. And it's not. It is in an environment that's hard for yeast to live in, but not because of the super high alcohol. It's kind of a very different, and the flavors are different. You're going to end up with much more kind of like honey and honeysuckle and like delicate kind of fruity kind of flavors, whereas this is much more kind of not earthy, but more nutty, and even sometimes some kind of bread, some kind of raisin, like that kind of a little bit of different flavor profile. Yeah.
And that one, the Terra Sol will ferment for 4, 5, 6 months sometimes, because it slowly starts trying. And then we have to protect that from air in order to keep those great aromas and flavors. We store it very differently than this. So
so there was a question in the glass. Go ahead.
Before we get to that, one other question. We have, if people have asked us in the past, right now we make most of the TD in stainless steel tank that sits outside. We have some in barrels. We've tried, the problem we ran into with barrels is something about the alcohol. When it's high alcohol and you put it in barrels, it's more prone to leak. And so when we put it outside, we got leaking barrels, and it was a bit of a mess. So we have some inside in barrels, and that's fine. It doesn't leak. But the problem is we don't get the temperature swings that we want the wine to expand and contract and pull in air and slowly oxidize. So yeah, we're not sure what to do. We are toying with we have toyed with the idea a few times of buying a big wooden tank to put outside and make it in that, and maybe we'll get some breathing through that. And hope it wouldn't leak. I guess it's possible it could leak.
I mean, we had to go water the barrel. In the summer, we would have to literally hose down the barrels every single day to keep them from leaking because they would just get dehydrated. So it just didn't work very well. Anyway, the glass. Oh, so there's a question about the glass. So we always have to show off our fancy glasses. Here it's a very small glass. It's not so exciting as the giant glass wines. And port is traditionally drunk out of a small glass, and basically it just, if you don't have a port glass, which would make you a normal person, like some people have every kind of glass under the planet, then just use this kind of a small wine glass. We'll drink it usually in just a regular white wine glass, which tend to be smaller, and the reason it's small is that partly it helps to kind of concentrate those aromas, and partly it's generally a little higher alcohol. So the small glass is supposed to remind you to kind of drink it judiciously. I think that's part of it. You can't get as much in. So it is, I mean, this is 19% alcohol, whereas a normal wine, our wines would be kind of more like 13, 14, maybe 15 in a crazy year. So, you're looking at a third more. You just have to pace yourself a little bit. That's kind of
I'm going to, while Sarah's searching for that, the usual public service announcement about this wine, because we keep it outside, because it's in a half full tank, it is exposed to oxygen. It is already aged. You can open this bottle, take a tiny little glass out, put a stopper in it or not, if you want, put it on a shelf. A month later, it will be better. We don't really know how long this wine will last. It'll be slightly different, but it won't be worse. We're not even sure if we left it on a shelf for 10 years open, what would happen. I don't really know. Well, okay, we evaporate, yeah.
Well, evaporates faster than everything else. So if there's nothing else, you lose that.
Yeah, it's nice that way. You don't need to put it in the refrigerator to produce it, to preserve it. You don't need to drink it all at once. It's just, it is what it is. Pull it out and drink it if you want.
There was a question about does the cork give you a hint about its ageability, and I think the answer is yes. That people will often, if you see it with like a plastic cork or a less kind of reusable cork, and more often without a real actual cork, it's kind of an indication that it hasn't gone through this oxidation process. It's more like of a ruby style. So that will not sit as long. It will not age as gracefully, I guess. So for something like that, you may want to drink it within maybe a week or so. Whereas if it tends to be with like a bigger cork or a reusable cork, like we put them in these stoppers, so it's just obvious you can take them in and out, then that's a hint that you can let it sit, and you really can let it sit for a long time. So that's that. That's a good question. Let me see
it is Collins is much more like a tawny style. I think most tawnies, maybe
we're going for, but
maybe all of them are exposed to oxygen as well. So a tawny port, you can do the same thing. Drink a small amount, put it on a shelf, drink a small amount later.
Right.
Keep drinking it for as long as you want. The rubies are usually I don't know. I don't know enough that I'm getting out of my depth here, but I think they're usually protected from oxygen, so they're going to change a lot and possibly get worse by being open for a while.
Yeah.
So
I don't know about the button rating from Sharon Rick. Sorry.
That's
cool. We should put you on the mic. I don't know. I never knew that.
Is that where what's the
hold on
the Hungarian word for buttons?
Lesson.
Is that putanyos or whatever it is? Their sweet wines are rated by something begins with a P that I can't pronounce. But yeah.
I do know that when they did their designation, they did designate just like if you have a port, it'll either be designated as a feitoria, which means it's a higher quality one and generally allowed for export, or a ramo, which is more supposed to be a second tier, and that's just like within the Portuguese ones. I don't know, and I don't know much more about it than that. So
the question about the best way to open and especially
It's
the
not
ones with the wax.
stupid. Yes.
It's
Okay.
not a stupid question. That wax was a disaster.
Oh, we tried so many things. So our favorite is the most recent, which is just a cork with nothing. The
Yes.
wax, the best thing to do is just put your corkscrew right through the wax. Don't try to take the wax off. It will go right through the wax. And it's not like a foil. You won't have a whole mess. And I think we did wax 2 or 3 times. We tried different iterations and they were always so complicated. So yes, don't try to get the wax off. You'll cut your finger. It's so hard when it's done. So the best thing is just go straight in. And I think we're going to just stick with this, like the most boring plain cork and nothing else, because we can't figure out anything else to make it easy to reopen. So
there's a question, do you decant? And no, you do not need to decant this wine.
Yeah.
It's essentially been decanted for 10 years in the tank. You don't need to do it again. Nope. It won't. It shouldn't even really close down in the bottle. It should be good right out of the bottle. So
I'm drinking a 7. I don't know. We're having the
we are drinking 7.
we're drinking 7 because
There you
that's what I had. I forgot to pick up any 8. But it's also good. It's all the same thing. It's just a little older.
It's amazing how
They do
different it
act like
changes.
change.
Yeah,
It changes a lot in the bottle, and
sometimes
that is one of the things you can wait and age them longer and longer in bottle. But
if anybody still has a TD1 out there, you'll notice it has a much more fruitiness
Right.
to it than the 2, which still has some fruitiness. And by 3 or 4, we got rid of it had aged long enough to really oxidize those flavors. So the 1 is very different than
there you go, Putoños, yeah.
Putoños. There it is. Yep.
I'm making a Madeira.
Oh wow. Do we have to buy like a ship to bring wine around the world, around the Horn of Africa, and come back? Oh my God. Yeah, I don't know anything about Madeira. Do you?
No. I may not how to make it.
Okay.
That is for sure.
Brian, you are in charge of making
You make it
Madeira.
and we'll try it.
We don't know how to make that.
That hasn't stopped us before. We may do it yet. I don't know.
We just have to make another mistake.
Yes,
say,
we have to make that. Let's boil it and see what happens. So one of the things I think people find a little mysterious is what to drink it with, right? And I think it's just that's always a question. Like, what do you drink your port style wines? What do you drink your fortified wines with? What is a good food pairing? So there are. I mean, most traditionally, I feel like people drink it with kind of an aperitif, like beginning of a meal. It will hold up better than a lot of wines to very strong cheeses, to smoked meat, to kind of a charcuterie plate. We have in our minds kind of wine and cheese go together, but a lot of cheese does not do wine any favors.
Yeah.
It's just too much. They compete, or it strips your tongue. The sweetness in this, and even partly the alcohol, will help stand up to a lot of stronger cheeses. So you really can have a kind of like a fun like antipasti plate kind of, and if you have salamis and cheeses and that type of thing, they'll go great with it. And you can also, if you have also in times when a little bit of sweetness, if you have like cheese with like apricot jam or something, it'll go great with a port style wine. And then also traditionally desserts. So I feel like we think of port as like the bookends of the meal. So it goes great with chocolate. I see a few votes for chocolate or caramel, or kind of some of those richer and a lot of nutty kind of things. So it goes great with, I'm here nibbling just for research purposes, not because it's dinner time and I'm hungry. Cashews, and I have some chocolate covered pomegranates, I think, and just some chocolate, and it's going great with it. So all those kinds of things are nice, like a little snack at the end of the meal kind of thing can be good. But some other ideas I read was also that it can, because of the sweetness, it can go very well with foods that I don't think we think of so much as wine foods. Like certain spicy foods can hold up really well to spicy foods, and foods with a little sweetness. So if you have like barbecue, or like smoked meats or smoked barbecue, like it can be great with that, because it's got enough of a sweetness to kind of mirror the sweetness in that food, but also that alcohol keeps your palate cleansed and kind of So times when you might think like, oh, this is sort of a beer food, like you might be able to try the port style wines, then they'll actually be surprising what they're going to do for the food. They can actually make that much more interesting. So
And I'm going to put a plug in for my own opinion on these, or the Terra Sol, or Sauterne like wines, or port like wines. I think of them as their own combination of wine and dessert in a glass, and I don't eat anything with them because I don't know. To me, that's kind of.
We have a cycle dessert in our dessert, just saying. But that's okay. If you can satisfy yourself with just the glass, go for it. However, you can have their other parts too.
You get to have both desserts, and I get to have both dinners.
He orders one, and yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
So there you go. And I also heard you can. I was reading up on some ideas, but they're like, you can put it where you'd have maple syrup. So I'm going to make a reduction and put it on my pancakes. Well, and you kind of make it more like a syrup, or you use balsamic vinegar, those kinds of things, because it can get very rich. It has that kind of richness. So,
So one of the comments I've heard that port bottles should be aged vertically rather than horizontally. Never heard that.
That's new to me. Yeah, I don't know.
Stumped us with a subject in which Sarah and Ed do not have an opinion. Come on, that can't be true. But yeah, it wouldn't be informed opinion, but it would be an opinion.
Yeah.
So
I don't know that. Yeah,
that's
I
interesting.
don't know about that.
I being the geek I am, I'll probably go look that up right after this is over.
Really?
Really? Is that true?
I need a lot of notes for this one, but I don't know. I don't have anything about that. So interesting. I think the clock is ticking.
Right.
I think so. I'm going to go through the logistics, right? We have a few, I mean, unless there are more questions. Oh, over vanilla ice cream. That sounds like a very good idea also. It is, yeah, because it's 6:20. We got to let people eat their dinners. Anyway, keep putting on questions if you have them, but otherwise I'm going to take a minute and just try to do our logistics. So, all right, January 7th is going to be our next happy hour. And we have here that we're going to do dealer's choice. So you guys get to pick, which I'm not sure if that means you're supposed to vote and tell us and we'll talk about it, or we're going to talk about whatever people want. Give me a face, Zoe. I don't know the answer. I should have asked this question earlier. We're happy for either one. Oh, that clock is fast because Ed's computer's clock is fast. Oh, we have plenty of time.
Maybe next month should be Black Ankle Madeira. What do you think?
As long as you make it between now and the new year,
We'll
no
have
problem.
a plan. In a month from now, we'll have a plan.
We'll have a plan. We'll figure out how you would make it and decide. There you go. I forgot that the clock was fast. So think about what you would like us to talk about, and we'll talk about it, and then we'll decide whether we're going to all drink the same thing or not. Obviously, you can always drink whatever you want. However, it is fun if you're drinking what we're talking about, I'd like to think. And we are talking about trying to do if we do pick a wine, to try to come up with a chocolate bark that would go with it. So if you wanted, you could have the whole experience. We are on to the logistics because it's winter and because we are still all about outdoor space only. We're going to shift our second Saturday hours just to daylight. So we're going to do our second Saturday kind of music situation during, we're going to start it at, what did I say? Oh, yeah, I was like, I'm reading. I thought it was straight to 3 o'clock. So we're going to do the music from 3 o'clock till 6 o'clock instead of sort of 6 till 9, just because we think the sun will help keep everybody a little bit warmer. And then poor musicians get up there. Even if you guys have lots of blankets, they have to have their fingers out and they freeze. So that's the plan for the second Saturdays through the winter. And, we'll be in touch and you'll see the website and Instagram and all of that as far as any changes. But our plan is to just shift. We've shifted Fridays earlier, and we're going to shift the Saturdays way earlier, just on the hopes that everyone will be able to still come out and enjoy. We are still sticking with all of our super, carefulness in terms of space and reservations and everybody only outside unless they need to pop in and use the restroom and all of that. So in support of that, I guess we're going to try to move things till indoors. We do have this week, we have Vince Desert, did I say that right? As the musician, and Brick and Fire Pizza will be there. So that's good because they're super yummy. We're working on kind of a fun event for January. in the everyone has to stay home and be indoors theme. We are working with a chef from Foraged Restaurant to do a like a little cooking cooking show, I guess, or cooking class. I don't know. So he's going to put together a menu, or we're going to work with him to put together a menu. We'll have a wine that it pairs with. And then if you're interested, you can come and get the ingredients from us kind of pre-prepped a little bit at Black Ankle, but then take it home and actually cook it yourself. And this will be a little more hands-on. It won't be like the meals we've done before where you just have to kind of warm it up and eat it. This one you're going to have to actually cook, but he is going to come and lead a class. So we can all kind of cook together. So we thought that would be kind of a fun January activity. I want to say it's January 17th, middle of January. The details will come once we're there. So that's coming up. And I think we have, so, and we're always talking about our virtual tastings, but we're still into virtual tastings again as we get into winter time. We're thinking if you have a group of people you often get together with for a holiday party or an office party or something like that, this is kind of a fun way to sub. And we can get wines to people. We can set you up on Zoom. One of us will lead it if you're interested. We can answer whatever questions, and then you guys can kind of have your parties from everybody's individual couches, but as kind of our alternative way to keep people together while staying apart. And I feel like what would pair with Christmas Eve and Christmas Day dinners? Oh, good questions. Fish chowder on Christmas Eve. I would go with the Chardonnay Reserve. Don't you think, for the fish chowder?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting one because it's kind of rich.
Yeah.
Oh, my dad is on this call who's fish chowder is famous.
Yeah,
so
true.
the Donald Boys fish chowder. Yeah.
I would want something kind of on the rich wine side, but yeah. Plus, I think for the cooking situation, we're going to have one wine to eat with and one wine to cook with. Just saying, because that's going to be a lot of cooking. That's my plan. Because I don't like to cook, even when it's all pre-chopped. It helps. It'll be a lot of fun. He's going to think about fish chowder. Oh, and then our subscription. So this is our new fun idea, just launching. I'm getting the don't forget to talk about, we're calling it Boots. And it is kind of an alternative to the wine club. So if you're thinking about somebody who you might want to introduce Black Ankle to, or somebody who might have fun learning a little bit more about wine, we're setting up this different kind of subscription service. And you can have wine shipped. It's just 2 bottles, and it's every 4 weeks or every 6 weeks or every 8 weeks. You get to choose your frequency. And unlike your wine club where you go in and you choose and then swap and do whatever, it's just, we're going to come up with bottles and then we're going to send them out with kind of a package of information. And the idea is that if you are brand new to wine or know very little, there'll be kind of like a paragraph or something about each of the wines that's going to help be dedicated to you with some basic things. If you're kind of medium in terms of your wine knowledge and interest, there's going to be a little more information available. And then if you're totally in the weeds wine geek, need to know why a port bottle has to be stored on its side instead of up, we're going to try to have some information there. So it's kind of like, I don't know, high, medium, and low in terms of level of information that we're gonna put in with the wines. And then the idea is that we'll also have kind of an activity or something to go with each shipment, so that it should just to make something kind of fun. So it might be something like this where we'll talk about the best way to taste different wines, or we might set up a cooking demonstration, or how to create a cool cheese plate, what kinds of things should be on it. So we'll, again, just kind of another way to explore food and wine, and with our wines on the background. So it's kind of more of a fun, I think it's kind of a good gifty thing. You could get it for yourself. I'm all about getting myself the gifts that I want, because why not? And you get what you like. But so that's there. That's all of my advertising for today.
Okay.
I think I covered. Did I miss any advertising? You guys shake your heads if I missed anything, but I've got my list. So
while you've been doing that, I've been thinking about the fish chowder thing. And I like Al and Karen's suggestion, the recommended vignette. The other way I was going was Bedlam. I think.
Yeah, true, because it has that like the phenolics a little bit. Yeah.
The richness of that. Chowders are, because of that cream or milk parts are kind of rich,
Right.
and the Bedlam will be able to meet it on those terms. So
All right. Well, you guys have to try it and see what you think. Oh, Mel's saying we have only 11 bottles of Bedlam left. So if you wanted to try the Bedlam, you better move fast. Or that you probably have some already, if I had to guess. But if not, the chispa could be work. Yeah. That can go with everything.
Yeah, you don't need to
Sparkling wine goes with everything.
yes, absolutely.
Especially
Yeah,
if you're cooking. You know, I shouldn't be so down on cooking.
exactly.
All right. That sounds like fun.
Okay. Well, that's
So
good.
yes, there will
Chispa.
be more chispa. It's a long process, but we're working on it. We have a bunch in the hopper, but it's a slow process. And we didn't make it. We made this, when was this? 2017, and we haven't done any since until this year. So there is definitely going to be a little bit of a gap.
It's at least 2 years away. But the good news is we laugh about the Black Ankle Madeira. We've spent the last 6 months probably immersing ourselves in sparkling wine. We actually we're on a webinar today about sparkling winemaking and techniques and this, and so it's going to be kind of fun and cool. And we're going to have blending options. We're going to have all sorts of different things, and it'll be fun. So
yeah, so that's coming. The chispa is our sparkling wine. Yes, I guess somebody's already answered, but yeah. So, and we only made, what did we make? 85 cases or something. There was very little, and it has not lasted, but we've got more coming. But as with all things, it's just a long wait. So I think, any other questions or anything? I think we're good. So, well, thank you to everybody for joining us again and for all the great questions. I didn't know that there would be an hour of things to talk about fortified wine, but we always manage to fill the hour somehow on something. And yeah.
Thank you as always to Nicole. That was awesome.
It is fun. I know, it's very fun. I feel like I'm going to know how to sign by the end, but I'm not there. So I'm going to just study a little harder. So for everybody, we hope we're not going, you're going to save it for, yes, exactly. Save it for a good occasion. So everybody, I hope, has a wonderful holiday season as we're getting into it. It's finally getting cold and windy out there, and let us know if you need anything and we can do anything to
stay safe,
help your holidays along. And it's been great seeing everybody again, and we'll see you all, if not outside at the winery in January. So great. All right. Cheers. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.